Welcome. There they are, Mr. and Mrs. Bycroft.
Right?
Yeah. These are petitions.
Wow, great. Thank you all for joining us and welcoming Dan Ellis here. I'm going to make a couple, Herman, great. I'm going to make a couple of comments and then we're going to quickly move over to Dan. And number one, if there's anyone here who is not on our roster, would you raise your hand who would like to be kept up to date? Okay. Anybody else? All right. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, November 29th. As most of you know, we had to move our October meeting into November because of being bumped as a result of the Sandy Art Show. John's working on a topic for that day, John Welle here, and it'll be an interesting topic. I don't want to get into, do you want to mention anything about what?
Well, we started talking about pseudoscience, but there's a lot of interest in nutrition and what is sort of pseudo-science nutrition. So it will be still pseudoscience, but it'll be nutrition focused. So if you've got stuff you want me to talk about, throw it out there on the group email and let's have a good discussion.
Okay. We're going to have probably what's becoming our annual holiday bash in December, which we'll try to figure out what we're going to do for that this year. I also want to mention that I sent out to all of you on the roster the changes that I am planning for this program. And if you have not gotten an email from me with those proposed changes, let me know before you leave and I'll give you a hard copy of that message, because I really would like to have your input as to how we're going to modify what we've been doing in order to keep this viable organization. So I do have a copy of that email I sent out if you'd like one. I also, if any of you would like a copy of our principles and objectives, which I attached to that same email, I have copies of that. So just see me at the end of the program. Before Dan starts, I just want to say a couple of words about why I asked Dan to join us. You know, I won't get into my background, but I've been a non-believer practically all of my life. I mean, religion went when I was 10 or 11, and it wasn't much longer that my belief in anything beyond what science has been able to find out for us also went. And I never paid much attention. I didn't call myself an atheist because I didn't have a name for not being I don't play golf and I don't have a name for it. You know, it was just there. I didn't think it was a big deal. It was like, to me, it's like I stopped collecting stamps. That all changed when I moved here. You know, I was 65 years old when I moved here 10 years ago. And quite frankly, I wasn't prepared for what I was going to encounter here. And one of the first things that happened to me is I encountered some guides down at Temple Square. It was my first walk around at Temple Square, and we got into a discussion. I remember it was that one visitors area where it's up looking into the sky, and I think there's a statue in the middle of it. And they started quizzing me about my beliefs, and when I told them I didn't have any, they literally had the color drained out of their face.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand why they found that surprising. And they said to me, well, then where do you get your morals? And I said, what? Well, you know, how can you be not a believer and have any morals? And I almost asked them, did you get through high school okay? So, And then that same theme was repeated when I started encountering missionaries. And I said, boy, oh boy, this is something different. And then the state liquor store, and this, what I call theocratic socialism. And then Proposition 8 came along, which really infuriated me when I found out the role that the LDS Church had played in that California initiative. I was down there demonstrating because I could not believe what nerve to interfere like that in people's lives. Hold on that. So I began to say, wait a minute, things are a little different here in Utah. I'm not used to this. I've come from the Chicago area and Boston and places like that. So 2.5 years ago, I said, I think there is a need for an organization, because I did find people that believe more like I did than the prevailing culture. And so I formed this group. I also started to get real angry about the fact that religious movements were beginning to infringe upon my constitutional and civil rights. I don't like movements that take away things from people simply because a particular religious belief is that way, and I've seen too much of that. I began to become sensitive to the polls that I had really never paid attention to before as to just where religion stands in terms of people's respect. I mean, we're buried down there at the bottom. I mean, the poor Muslims are down there with us. And I said, well, this is ludicrous. And the fact that if I wanted to run for office, which I never felt like I needed to do, half of the people wouldn't vote for me simply because I didn't share a particular religious belief. I assume they'll vote for a Scientologist or anyone else, but they were not going to vote for me because I'm not a believer. So that got underneath my skin. Along the way, so what started out as a group here, for those that have been here from the beginning, where we talk about religion and its place in culture and history and society, we begin to expand the definition of free thinking to bring in things like religion, politics, science, history, news, etc., to broaden the perspective of free thinking. But I really believe that we, at least speaking for myself, need to feel comfortable not interfering with people's beliefs, whatever they may be, but standing up for our own principles. And that's why I've turned to Dan and his organization, because I believe organizations like the Atheists of Utah are really helping to, they're at the vanguard of helping to stimulate some different thinking out there, even in a place like Utah, which Dan can talk about as far as what that must be all about. But, you know, the fastest growing religious group in this country right now are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. Now, they're not all atheists, but they have detached themselves from any established religion. And that is a trend. And by 2030, a third of the population is going to be in that category. So, I've turned to Dan and his organization because I have an awful lot of respect for what they stand for and how they present their case. And that's why I've invited Dan Ellis to meet with us. And Dan, I'm going to say something about you right now, and then I'm going to turn it over. All right, Dan was born in Brigham City, Utah, and was raised as a member of the state's predominant faith, but he never really believed any of it. He officially resigned from the LDS Church and has been an atheist activist for the last 8 years. Dan is the former media contact, vice president, and president for both Salt Lake Valley Atheists and Atheists of Utah, and is currently serving as Secretary for Atheists of Utah. He also serves as Regional Director for American Atheists here in Utah. Dan's been interviewed and featured in both local and national news stories surrounding atheism, Satanism, and activism. And finally, he's been one of the co-hosts of the Godless Rebelution. That's Rebelution.
It's a portmanteau.
Yes. For podcasts for nearly 4 years now. I listen to his podcast. It's interesting and it's funny. In addition to his grandchildren, Dan's got a great sense of humor and has partners with him that have similar sense of humor. And I was listening to one last night. I've already promoted the whole concept of podcasts with you all. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan. Dan's got a presentation. Please, we'll go through this and then we'll allow time for plenty of discussion. We'll be doing it with mics, and that's it. Let's hear it for Dan Ellis.
Thank you very much, Don. I appreciate that. Can you all hear me well enough? My voice isn't nearly as smooth and nice as Don's, but I'll try to project and make sure everybody can hear me.
There's a mic if you need it.
Yeah, if you have any trouble hearing me, let me know and I'll grab the microphone. Thank you all very much for coming out today, and thank you, Don, for having me over. This is the first time I've given this presentation, and I'm ordinarily not as quick on my feet early in the mornings, especially if I haven't had my go juice yet. Don was kind enough to get me some coffee, so I'll be sipping on that while I'm going through the presentation. I wanted to talk to you all a little bit today about the future of atheist activism, and in doing that we're going to have to talk a little bit about the past and how religion has created certain roadblocks and stumbling blocks for basically everything along the way except for promoting the idea of religion. As Don said, I have served for Atheists of Utah and I'm currently doing that and working for American Atheists as regional director here. It's a voluntary position, but I get to meet a lot of cool people and talk to a lot of really cool people. So I was a bit of a surprise to the family in more ways than one when I was born. As Don mentioned, I was born and raised here in Utah, in Brigham City. Most of my extended family still lives in Brigham City. I have lived pretty much in every city up and down the Wasatch Front at one time or another, and have lived in Utah almost my entire life. My family had a brief stint where we lived in Wyoming when I was really young, Rock Springs area. But really the only thing that I remember about living in Wyoming was that it was always cold, it was always windy, and some kids stole my football. That's about all I remember of Wyoming. I'm the oldest grandchild on both sides of my family, for both my mom's parents and my dad's parents. And until very recently, I was the only member of my extended family to openly leave the LDS Church. And I'm still the only person in my family who's openly atheist. I suspect there are a few of my cousins who are also atheists now, due in large part to the LDS Church's recent crackdown on the LGBTQ community and saying that they wouldn't allow children of gay parents to be baptized into the church, which is a pretty terrible thing. I've been an atheist my entire life, but I didn't have the appropriate vocabulary for it until I was in my 20s. Like Don, I didn't even realize what an atheist was. It wasn't until I was working at a call center for AT&T a little over 20 years ago that I met one of my coworkers there who said that he was an atheist and suggested that I read Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World, Science is a Candle in the Dark. It's a great book, but in it, a lot of the things that Carl Sagan was talking about as far as religion goes and the way that he thought about the world completely aligned with how I felt and thought about the world that I saw around me. And I figured it out that, okay, well, yeah, I'm an atheist. Well, now I have a term to describe what I don't believe in, but it doesn't really tell people a whole lot about what I do believe in, other than that I reject the idea of an invisible sky wizard who's controlling everything around us. So that was in my 20s, but I didn't really talk to people a whole lot about it for a very long time. There's a sense for people outside of atheism, for religious people in general, that anybody who decides that they're an atheist is also a Satanist, which I am also a Satanist, but that's a different story. That's a fairly recent development, and it's something else we can talk about at the end if you'd like. I don't want to make this presentation very long. I'd much rather talk with people than just to you. So I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible, and we can turn it over to questions, and I can just talk to you guys. Before becoming an atheist activist, I was just an apatheist, where I didn't really believe in a god or gods, but I didn't think it was all that important to talk to anybody about it. I figured I would just do my thing and religious people could do their thing. But hey Robert, how are you?
Well, I'm here. Apologize for being late.
No problem. Good to see you. It wasn't until several years later that I realized that, I can leave religion alone and I can not talk about it, but it will never ever leave me alone or a lot of the people that I care about. We see it every day that the pernicious influence of religion trying to insert itself into the lives of everybody else, whether you're a believer or follower of that religious faith tradition or not. The people within those faith traditions want you to live by their standards and what they believe. They're not going to leave you alone until you conform to what they want you to believe. As Don said, I served as vice president of media contact for Atheists of Utah, then as president for Atheists of Utah, while I was also serving as president for Salt Lake Valley Atheists. I merged the two groups together in April of 2013 because it just got to be too much juggling events for two different groups of pretty much the same people. There was a lot of crossover between the two organizations, a lot of, we were doing a lot of the same events, having the same speakers, so it just got to be kind of a logistics and management nightmare. So I merged the two groups together. That was in April of 2013. Served on the board through 2014, I believe, and then took about a year and a half off. I wasn't serving on the board for Atheists of Utah or anywhere else, just I got to kick back and go to their events as an actual attendee and just have fun instead of trying to host and stress out about organizing it and putting it all together. That was a lot of fun, but then there's always turnover in groups, and being an unpaid volunteer for an organization that attracts a lot of heat and attention from other organizations and people can be pretty stressful, especially when the people who are ostensibly on your side and are members of your community are constantly trying to tear you down and pick apart everything that you're doing, that you're not doing it the right way, or you should be doing different things. So a lot of people get burned out and leave. So there was some internal stress within the board, so I was asked to come back and help out for a little bit. So they appointed me a position on the board for I think 6 months, and then I ran during the last election to fill the vacancy, and have been serving on the board since then, and I believe my term ends this summer. So hopefully we can find some good board members and I can take another little break and just attend events and help the organization monetarily and support-wise and with some guidance, but won't have to deal with all of the day-to-day stuff, because I'm a pretty busy guy. I love doing it, but there's a lot of other things that I would love to do as well. I am a golfer, Don. Where did he go? But he should do that. I was chosen as regional director for American Atheists in April of 2014. And as Don also mentioned, I also co-host the Godless Rebelution podcast. We started that up in 2014 just after the American Atheist Convention was here in Salt Lake. And the first time that I met my co-hosts was when we recorded the first episode that night. Like, we'd never met in life before, and it all just worked out. We worked together pretty well. Yes?
What station or channel is that on?
You can find it all over the internet. It's on iTunes and Stitcher and
Oh, we have to go internet.
Google Play. Yeah, it's all on the internet. You can find it on our website at godlessrebelution.com. We'll move on to my next slide. So, as I said, we see religion's influence in everything we do, and a lot of that is because of single issue voters. I personally, this is just me talking. This isn't me talking for American Atheists or for Atheists of Utah or anything else. I am not a big fan of our president and a lot of the policies that he's been instituting, and I know a lot of atheist people who voted for him because of a single issue. They picked one single issue that they thought he may be able to help them personally with, and we see the results of that all the time. It probably doesn't surprise you that 3 of the 4 largest voting blocs are evangelicals, Catholics, and Protestants. I think Don mentioned it earlier that the largest or the quickest growing group are the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S. But we are not viewed as a single block because not everybody is an atheist, not everybody has the same sense of ethics or morals or beliefs and everything else that should happen in the world around them. They just don't happen to have a particular religious belief. But if we were to band together, we would be the largest voting bloc, outnumbering evangelicals, Catholics, and Protestants all. That's according to the latest Pew Research in 2016. You can argue that we aren't a voting bloc because we aren't united. So what if we're the largest? Why aren't we represented in the current political environment? This is something that I get really frustrated by. That whenever there's an incident that happens or an event where they're calling together, religious leaders from various organizations, from faith traditions, nobody ever gives a thought to inviting humanists or atheists or non-believers in general, and we're a huge portion of the population, and nobody ever thinks to include us, and Atheists of Utah and American Atheists are both working to get that changed to where when something happens and there is a gathering for discussion among religious leaders or religious thought leaders or just thought leaders within different communities, that they do think to include atheists and non-believers and humanists in that. One of the biggest issues, of course, for these groups is abortion. That's, I would argue, the primary, that's the biggest reason why a lot of religious people vote for conservatives to put them in office, is because of abortion and their beliefs surrounding abortion, that it's murder, that the conservatives are going to stop it, which they never will. It'll just become more dangerous for women. And we see this a lot through the conservative side of politics and religious issues, that it's very much about conservatism and controlling what women can do with their own bodies. A lot of the other social issues that are involved, we've got things like dying with dignity, sex education, prayer in public schools, LGBTQ community, Planned Parenthood, creationism, women's rights, Gideon's Bibles being placed in hotels and distributed at schools, death penalty, science and funding and denial of science, religious funding, bathroom bills, racial justice, immigration, church programs in schools, and separation of church and state. There are a lot of great organizations out there, including the FFRF and American Atheists, that work really hard to maintain that wall of separation between religion and government. So what 3 things do we have in common? The religious right is on the wrong side of most of those issues that were just on the screen. Most of the issues are equal rights issues. And these are all separation of church and state issues, because if you take religion out of the equation for all of those things, so many of the answers to them become clear, and they're not answers that we see coming from the conservative side of politics. If we were to maintain a strict wall of separation between church and state, a lot of those issues would go away and we could move on with improving the lives of everybody else. Is separation of church and state an atheist issue? Of course. Here are some others. Government prayer, Bibles, Ten Commandments monuments everywhere, giant crosses. American Atheists, of course, was involved, and Atheists of Utah and Richard Andrews with getting the Utah Highway Patrol crosses taken down that were on the side of the road, and moved to private land versus public land. Religious funding for schools and fixing playgrounds at religious, houses of worship. No public funding should go to that, but we see that creeping influence and public funds now going to those types of activities. Traditionally, we've fought against government prayer, Bibles, Ten Commandments, etc., but we're being outflanked in all of these other issues, like dying with dignity, like sex education, like equality for the LGBTQ community, Planned Parenthood, women's rights. All of these other things that we haven't been focusing on as non-believers are all being attacked by people on the conservative side. Public education is another area. We have the president who has appointed somebody to be the education secretary who never went to public school, has really no idea what she should be doing for her job, and wants to help privatize a lot of public school and give money to religious institutions for religious people to send their kids to private religious institutions. That's something that we shouldn't allow. We have activities at a bunch of public schools like, the Good News Club, where they seek to indoctrinate children at public schools. They want to keep the faith in public schools. They want to make sure that students are taught the limits of science and have access to the full range of scientific views on evolution. That's what we would like to do. Of course, religious people would choose or would ask that we not do that. They don't want people to learn about evolution. They don't want people to learn about a lot of the basic science that's available, and they don't want them to be critical thinkers, because if you're a critical thinker, you can think your way out and past a lot of the religious beliefs that you're indoctrinated into. And really, faith and religion messes up all of these areas in the educational system. For language arts, biblical literacy is being pushed into schools as a way of people becoming more literate in other areas. And they're using these as little wedges to get religious viewpoints inserted into public education as much as possible. The Christian creation story can be told while studying social studies or ancient history, Declaration of Independence, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. These are all of the ways in which religions try to insert themselves into our public education system. They focus on specific tiny little things to expand their narrative that the United States is a quote-unquote Christian country, or is, that our laws are all based on and around the Bible. The ideal way would be to abolish the public school system. How? Through vouchers. That's the kind of thinking that we see coming out of conservative right-wing politics these days as they try to dismantle our both our secular government and secular institutions that have been created by our government. This is again talking about vouchers, where, as I mentioned before, we see that a lot of religious institutions want to be able to take public funds out of public coffers and be able to give that over to private religious institutions for the education of children, and primarily it's in order to indoctrinate them. If you get them while they're young, they're more likely to stay within the church. We've talked about voucher programs, I think, enough. As far as local government goes, of course, John F. Kennedy said, "I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute." I think a lot of younger people don't understand a lot of the history that the United States has gone through, even as recently as, from between the 40s, 50s, 60s up until now. They don't understand how hard it was for John F. Kennedy, who was a religious guy, but was the wrong kind of religious guy back then, how hard it was for him to get voted into office. That he had to, it was like Mitt Romney running as a Mormon. He had to go on this tour explaining what Mormonism is, and if he would allow it to influence his decision and policy making. John Kennedy had to do the same thing as a Catholic back when he was running for office. In cities across the country, we see things like the Ten Commandments monuments going up. There was the Ten Commandments monument in Oklahoma that was destroyed and then rebuilt and then destroyed again. And it was destroyed both times by the same guy who says that he's a Christian, and he didn't believe that the Ten Commandments should be on public property. We see giant crosses going up on public property. We see religious scenes like the creche and the manger being put up on public property all the time. And of course, when atheists step in and try to make it a more public and open forum, if they want it to be an open and public forum, they need to allow for other religious viewpoints or even non-religious viewpoints. We see In God We Trust being put on actual vehicles for the government. These are all the ways in which religion is slowly creeping more and more into our society, and yet Christians will claim persecution and that we're trying to do away with them at every turn. We're not. We're trying to stop this special entitled treatment that religion seems to enjoy here in the United States. We see that even in cities across the world or across the nation, that they offer sectarian prayer before a lot of city council meetings, before state meetings. How do we fight back? Whenever one person stands up and says, "Wait a minute, this is wrong," it helps other people do the same. We fight back at all levels. We need to do it at the federal, state, and local level. At the federal level, we've got President Trump trying to do away with the Johnson Amendment. He's trying to offer specific religious exemptions and school vouchers. At the state level, we need to try to get more access to dying with dignity. It shouldn't be up to somebody other than you how and when you choose to die. You shouldn't be forced to suffer if you're in pain and your quality of life is nil. But a lot of religious people would choose to have you, or would force you to continue living your life in pain and shame for as long as they want, until their God decides that it's time for you to go. At the local level, we have things like fairness ordinance, environment concerns, and CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's an international treaty that was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1979. Somewhere else where we can pitch in is on school boards even. One of the big problems that we have currently in our schools is that a lot of the textbooks that are used in schools all over the nation come from Texas. And of course, Texas is, for the most part, a very conservative, very religious state, and they edit textbooks to remove references specifically to things like evolution and climate change because that doesn't fit with their religious narrative. We need to use the word atheist to change an individual's mind and fight for equal rights so that we can change the minds of entire communities. I know a lot of people who are atheists won't use the word atheist because there's a certain stigma attached to the word itself. Like I said, for a long time I didn't use the label myself because there seems to be this constant thought within a lot of religious communities that atheists are evil people, that we're bad, that we're all seeking to destroy their way of life and bring about the end of the world, which really I don't want the end of the world to come anytime soon. That's why I try to educate people on things like climate change and evolution and how our actions do affect the world around us and everybody on it. We need to create partnerships outside the atheist movement. This is talking about intersectionality. We need to understand that a lot of people, I work with people from all kinds of religious faith traditions, all kinds of history, all kinds of background. I am happy to work with people on projects where we have common cause and common goals. I don't care if they're religious, if we're working to help somebody build a home whose home was destroyed through a flood or earthquake or whatever. I'm happy to work with religious people in order to help those other people around me. And I want to make sure that I'm there so that the people who are being helped by religious organizations aren't being made to suffer through indoctrination and grilling and come to the understanding from the religious people that are helping them that the only reason they are there helping them is because God sent them there to help them. And they need to turn to God in these times for more assistance. Because you don't. There are people who don't believe in a God who are there to help you as well. The results, as I said, when you use the label atheist, you can change an individual's mind, and then when you as an atheist stand up for equal rights, you can change the way a community views atheists. I think I'm a pretty nice guy. A lot of people don't think I'm a nice guy. A lot of people charge me with trying to lead people to hell, and I'm like, I don't believe in hell. I can't lead anybody there for a place that I don't even believe exists. And I love talking about hell. If you guys have questions about hell, that's awesome. It's one of my favorite topics. American Atheists has started an ACES program. ACES is for activism, community, education, and social outreach. The activism part is doing things like lobbying at the State House, arguing for dying with dignity, arguing against removing the Johnson Amendment, sex education, trying to make sure that people know more things than what their religion wants to teach them, and to let them know all of the things that will help them that their religion wants to keep hidden from them. Community. Atheists of Utah has an Adopt a Highway program. We've adopted a section of State Street between Reams and I can't remember the name of the hotel or motel. It's a pretty seedy little place. I think they charge by the hour, and whenever we're cleaning up around there, we find a lot of interesting items. But so we've adopted that section of State Street for the Adopt a Highway program. We do volunteering for Planned Parenthood. We work with the Homeless Youth Resource Center quite a bit, go and feed the homeless youth there. We volunteer at the Utah Food Bank. We've done volunteer work with ACLU and had ACLU speakers come out and talk to us. We hold food drives and we take food and deliver it to the Utah Food Bank. And of course we participate in the local Pride festivals for the LGBTQ community. There are currently 3 that we're participating in. That's Salt Lake, Provo, and Ogden. Next year I think we may also be participating in Logan Pride. And there's also a Moab Pride Festival that I've just gone to and attended in the past. That's a whole lot of fun. We haven't organized having an actual booth there because then it's driving all of our stuff down to Moab and trying to figure out the logistics of what to do with it there. But so we try to be good supporters and advocates for our natural allies. Of course, the members of the LGBTQ community, there's a lot of crossover with members of that community who are also atheists. A lot of them become atheists because their religion has shunned them or told them that they're lesser people, that they're bad, that they're evil, that their innate sense of who they are and who they would choose to love is a bad and evil thing, which often drives them away from religion. They become a natural ally for atheists and vice versa. Education, we bring in monthly speakers. Don is doing that, it sounds like, with a lot of the people that he brings in to talk to you guys. We do a lot of social outreach and social activities. Atheists of Utah has something going on all the time. We've got coffee chats, we've got Godless cocktails, we've got monthly speakers. We have a comedy night coming up next weekend. We hold galas and auctions, and there's a ton of stuff. You can find all of those events at the Atheists of Utah website. You can find them on Meetup and Facebook. We're all over the place and pretty easy to find. The rest of this, I think I just want to skip through real quick. Of course, to ask, it's really hard to compete against religion because they have so much by way of resources. I mean, the LDS Church asks its members for 10% of their gross income. And when they have those kinds of resources, it's really hard for smaller local secular organizations to compete against that. That's why I'm personally a member of CFI, of FFRF, American Atheists, Atheists of Utah. Any secular organization that I see out there doing good things, I throw money at them because I don't have all of the time to do everything that I would like to do and lead the charge for everything, but I know that my money can help organize them and give them funds to do things like American Atheist Billboard Campaign or Freedom from Religion Foundation bringing lawsuits against the creeping, encroaching perniciousness that is religion that we see all around us. So I would ask that I don't care which organization it is that you donate money to. I have a couple preferences, but that if this is a cause that you believe in, that you do support organizations of your choosing with your money. And that's the easiest and best thing that you can do to help a lot of these organizations continue to grow and continue to fight for the rights of you and even the non-believers who don't, and even the believers who dislike what they're doing, because ultimately they're fighting for everybody. So I'm going to wrap it up there and open it up for questions.
Okay, I'll walk around again. Maybe you can meet me at the walkway here. Victoria, so. And if you just raise your hands, go. Lynette, then Sally Jo.
I want to know what to see.
Can you be an atheist without being a materialist?
Can you be an atheist without being a materialist? Well, sure, I suppose so. It just would require that you don't have any firm belief in a god or gods. Beyond that, yeah, I mean, well, and that's the thing too, right, is that being an atheist really means that you've answered the question, or that you've answered one of the easiest questions available, right? That's it. That's really all being an atheist is. It's all of the other stuff that atheists may choose to believe in and work toward as humanists, as freethinkers, that become the goals that we set. I mean, really, saying that you're an atheist doesn't really tell me much about you other than that you don't believe in a God and that we may agree on that one single point. But I know a whole lot of conservative atheists, I know a lot of libertarian atheists, I know a lot of atheists who know jack shit about politics and the world around them. I know a lot of people who say they're atheists who have no real understanding of the history and the philosophy surrounding religious thought. They just personally find the idea of an invisible guy in the sky laughing right? So, I mean, they're telling me you're an atheist doesn't really tell me a whole lot about you. Tell me other things about you that would let me know other things that you believe. If, you know, if you're a humanist, if you believe in equality, if you believe in civil rights for everybody.
Thank you. So, is it on?
Yeah, just you have to,
He gave you a dead mic.
I know.
you have to,
He does want me to ask my
oh, yeah, see, you just,
I can talk loud enough if I need to.
It's cutting in and out there for some reason.
Okay.
you have to talk into that.
Yes. Okay.
Talking to the dent on the
All
side.
right. Where can I view
Your presentation,
on podcast?
Where can you view my this presentation?
Yeah, the video part of
that part of it, because I can't read.
Oh, so are you asking where you can find the podcast or where you can find the video of today's thing?
that one, yes.
The video of today's thing?
Yeah.
John is taking video.
We're recording it now. It'll be available on YouTube. I'll send a link out, and Don's gonna also put it up on Facebook.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, John, for recording.
First here,
Would you stand away from the podium and lift your beard?
So you-
Certainly.
Thank you.
Revolution.
I was curious what the,
Yeah, it's pitchfork and torch.
that's
Firebrand.
the Godless Rebelution that I mentioned. It's a podcast.
I have two questions. One is, do you have handouts that have all of those slides on it? There's a lot of information there.
Do I have handouts with the? No, I do
Are
not.
they available to get handouts with your slides?
What I'll do is I'll email the presentation to Don, and then he can email it out to your group or whatever.
Okay,
Does that sound good?
I don't have a group, but that's okay.
Well, he
I
can
do it to persons too.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure how he would make it available, but I can give it to Don and he can send an
This is
email out.
Connecticut talk. She's from Connecticut, that's.
Yes, I just moved here from Connecticut. So
That explains
I came here to meet more liberal people.
What brought you here from Connecticut?
A daughter and 5 wonderful grandchildren.
Wow.
So, I love Draper, I love living here and having access to Sandy. The second question is, my sister and I have discussions sometimes like the atheists will be the last ones out of the closet because you can't possibly get elected public office if you're an atheist. But I am interested in your shirt. Do you somewhere have access to places where people could get shirts in that theme?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Is that on the God?
Yeah, no, there are links out on our website for all of that. You bet.
All right, Victoria, then Joni.
Okay.
I believe in a goddess rather than a god. Does that make me an atheist?
Do you have an active belief in a goddess?
Yes.
I would say that you're not an atheist then, you're a theist of some sort. Obviously not traditional Christianity, but yeah, an atheist basically is disbelief or not being convinced in the idea of a creator of the universe who rules over anything, whether that's that you're a deist. Well, it doesn't have to be a man even. I mean, it could be a woman. It could be just a giant monster for all we know. If you imagine what a god would be, you could go back to H.P. Lovecraft and the elder gods, who were monsters or demigods in Greek mythology, who were larger than life people. A lot of people equate comic book reading and that kind of stuff to some sort of hero worship or religion sometimes as well. So,
Is that yes or no?
is what yes or no? That you believe in a goddess, but no. If you have an active belief in a goddess, I would say no, you are not an atheist because you believe in some. I would imagine that this goddess has some form of supernatural powers, that she may have created the earth and the universe and everything else. So no, you would not be an atheist then.
Okay, Joni, and then, yes ma'am, I'll get to you. Joni?
I'm Joni Bycroft. I have a comment more than a question. Joe and I were listening to NPR on our way over here today. The Mormon Church in 2010 collected 33 billion BILLION dollars, and those were untaxed dollars in 2010. Really irritates me.
Well, and that's just the money that they collect in tithing from their parishioners. That has nothing at all, that doesn't talk anything at all about all of their land holdings, all of their business
We
development.
need to collect taxes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Steve, and then get her over here.
Well, and only a very, very minuscule, itty bitty, teeny tiny portion of any of that money goes to actual charitable work. The rest of it goes to paying the stipends for the Area 70s and the Quorum of the 12. It goes toward building more churches, more temples, and basically just spreading the religion. It doesn't go to actual charitable works.
I found over 7 years ago now, I've been taking $1 bills, and now every bill I get, I cross out God and replace it with the word reason.
Yeah.
Then I take the bill and hand it to the clerk and say, oh, what does that say up there? And the clerk, they crossed out God and put the reason. Now, I'll always say, oh, I think that's a great thought. And believe it or not, over these 7 years, I know 4 people in a store that I patronize a lot that are now atheists.
That's all it took.
We're all retired. You can sit there and cross out God, put in reason, and make people think.
I have a rubber stamp that is that just says E pluribus unum, and I just stamp that on the bill.
Oh, cool. Same thing.
Yeah.
Got a bad mic.
Yeah, the
I
mic
don't
is
know
really
what the soft
flaky.
spot is on that, maybe you can find it.
I think that my question was answered when they asked about the goddess, but I don't believe in a goddess or a god, but I feel I'm spiritual. I feel a spirituality. Where does that fall?
Well, I think when people say they're spiritual, I think that's very individual, right? It's different for everybody that you ask. You know, if I were to ask you, what do you mean exactly by being spiritual, I'm sure your answer would be different than somebody else who would say that they're also spiritual. I think we also find that within traditional faith traditions or religions, that anybody that you ask, and it's one of my favorite things to do, is to get people within certain faiths arguing about tenets within the faith that they say they're both following. There are a couple guys that I work with, and I got them arguing one day, they're both LDS, I got them arguing one day on whether or not the Holy Ghost can follow you into a strip club. And it was really funny, because one of the LDS guys was arguing that, oh no, of course the Holy Ghost can't follow you into a strip club. That's why you're not supposed to go into them. And the other guy said, no, I know you're wrong, and I know you're wrong because I went into a strip club, and I would have done some really terrible things if the Holy Ghost wasn't there whispering to me while I was there. So that's one of my favorite things, is getting people to argue about religious points of their own doctrine.
And
Well,
John?
It amazes me that in the 21st century, people still believe in this mumbo-jumbo superstitious nonsense called religion. And it's, to me, the whole basis for religion is people thinking they're never gonna die. It's about the resurrection. They're just gonna float off to heaven and be in the arms of their heavenly Father, which is absurd because it defies biological nature. I looked up the definition of soul in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and it states in there, the soul is given credit for all the functionings of the brain, but the soul doesn't exist. There's no physical being of the soul. And it just amazes me that people get caught up in this nonsense. And that's, to me, that's what, well, Karl Marx and I think also Nietzsche stated that religion is the opiate of the masses. And I think that theists they're junkies. They're escaping the reality of death.
Yeah, I
There
think.
you go. I like that.
Then I'll,
Yeah, I think that happens for a lot of people. I think of
Somewhere
course
on their
people naturally have a fear of death. You know, they don't want to deal with the idea of no longer existing.
Well, you're not gonna know anything
Right.
when you're dead because the brain dies. There
Right.
ends consciousness.
Yeah, well, it's
Duh.
weird too, right? Because religion teaches you that you can, if you're good and you follow whatever dictates according to whatever the dictates are of your own religion, that you may continue on with eternal life in heaven at the right hand of God or whatever. But you would think that for a religion that teaches that you can have an eternity of happiness once you're gone, that there would be celebrations of when people die, and we don't see that. You know, even the most religious people that I know are the ones who are most upset when their loved ones die, and I don't know if it's that they're afraid that their loved one is going to hell, or what the deal is, because really if they believe that their loved one was a good person, and they also believe in the teachings of their religion, they should be celebrating that person's death for being, you know, for now being at the right hand of God and living in a gold mansion in the sky and being forever happy and not experiencing any pain. They should be celebrating that, and instead we see them mourning all the time. So I don't know if they're mourning just the loss of that person that they won't be able to get to see and be with them every day, but really then that betrays the natural bias that they would have, that if their religion were true, it would be a celebration. But I think they doubt that it is, or they have some doubts that it is, and of course there's the idea that they would be missing the person who's no longer with us.
And also look at how many people are afraid to die that are holier than thou.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, like, why are you so afraid? You should be excited about that.
yes, here, here.
You mentioned Satanism briefly.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you could make a distinction between what is atheism, what is Satanism, and especially the modern secular Satanism.
Yeah, so
Good luck with that.
for me, atheism and Satanism are not mutually exclusive. I am a Satanist in the tradition of the Satanic Temple, which is a fairly new organization. It's an atheistic religion. I know it takes a bit to wrap your mind around the whole idea, and it's a very nuanced position, and it would take me a long time to explain all of it. But your question was, I'm sorry.
I just wanted you to clarify again the idea that the Satanic Temple you're talking about is in fact secular and not
Yes.
theistic. I think a lot of people do have a hard time understanding that, and it's not the traditional Satanism that a lot of people might think of.
Right, yeah, it's not Satanism as defined by religious people. It's Satanism as defined by people who all believe in the same basic goals of improving humanity and equal rights for others, and of improving the world, of leaving it a better place than it was when we all got here.
That's humanism.
Yeah, that is.
So why call it Satanism?
Well,
It's humanism.
The reason that Satanism and the Satanic Temple have been so successful in a lot of their things is that they're arguing for secularism and or religious pluralism. So when you have things like the Ten Commandments monument in Oklahoma, atheists can stand up and sue and say, well, we want that taken down because it's an endorsement of religion on public property. What the Satanic Temple does, and the niche they fill so perfectly, is to say, okay, the argument coming from religion's side is that this isn't an endorsement of any particular religion, though we know it is. but they're saying it's not an endorsement of any particular religion. It's celebrating the fact that we live in a Judeo-Christian nation where our laws are based on the Bible, that it all stems from Christianity, and that this is an open forum to people of all faiths. And so the second that the Satanic Temple steps in and says, okay, great, if you want to celebrate all religious traditions and faiths, and we live in a pluralistic nation, then we also get access to this public forum that you've created. We want a statue of Baphomet on the public square. And then we see how quickly the state decides, okay, well, no, we're just going to close that down. A lot of the time, it doesn't even take a lawsuit for that. It's just the Satanic Temple stepping in and saying, if you really are arguing for religious pluralism, then we get the opportunity also. You've opened this up to the public. We're part of the public. We have a religion. This is this thing that we want there to represent our religion. You can choose to take yours down and have no others, or you can include us as well.
It works.
So it's just a
right there.
political.
It's a political.
It's both. I mean, the Satanic Temple does have their 7 tenets that are wonderful things to live by. It's something that's shared by everybody who identifies as that. What's that?
What are they?
I can look them up for you real quick here. If I'm on the Wi-Fi. Or I can look them up on my phone.
Humanism might have a name.
Maybe
While I'm looking for those, we can take
not
it from
information.
Okay, well, yes, go ahead.
I have a question that's based on your NPR comment about the billions that are taken in by the LDS Church. Is there an accounting that's given to parishioners, like on a monthly basis, telling where the funds are?
I'm 58 years old. I haven't been a Mormon since I was 23. So it's been a long time, and back in those days, they did not send us any kind of accounting.
Okay, so no monthly accounting.
Not that I'm aware of.
No, they used to publish a statement of income every time the church.
How do they not do that when they are tax exempt?
Because it's a religion and
Now,
not a
let's ask Dan.
501c3.
He kind of knows more about it than me.
Yeah, religions don't have to follow the same rules with the IRS that other nonprofit organizations have to follow. American Atheists, Atheists of Utah, all these other secular organizations or atheist organizations have to file out loads and loads of paperwork for the IRS that religious institutions do not have to fill out, just because they are deemed religious nonprofit organizations.
Just on that point, point of information, I believe there's a new book by the excommunicated historian Michael Quinn. I saw a review of it recently that looks into the financial aspects.
That's, yeah.
Oh, that's who was talking
That's
today?
who was
Okay,
talking.
okay.
Thank you for being the smart guy in the room.
I haven't seen it, I don't, endorse it one way or
Slip through
the
the
other.
filter.
I would say that in the review that I saw of the book, he did make the point that there's a standard salary for the apostles, which I believe he said was $120,000 a year.
Yeah,
From
there's
the
stipend.
profit on to the 70 and so on, which is not that extraordinary when you consider CEOs' salaries and so forth. But anyway, there is a book, Michael Quinn, that you might want to take a look at.
By the way, there's also, for those of you that like YouTube, there is a post called the Mormon Leaks. If you're really fascinated about it, you're familiar with this, Dan?
Yeah.
Some chap has become the recipient of various secret documents that people leak out. And you can find it on YouTube under Mormon Leaks. Let's see.
So, real quick, I wanted to say that I've got the 7 tenets from the Satanic Temple up here. So Christianity has the 10 Commandments, or 12 or 15, depending on which book and religion you want to use. But the 7 tenets of the Satanic Temple are: 1, one should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. Number 2, the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. 3, one's body is inviolable, subject to one's will alone. 4, the freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego your own. 5, beliefs should conform to our best scientific understanding of the world. We should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit our beliefs. Number 6, people are fallible. If we make a mistake, we should do our best to rectify it and resolve any harm that may have been caused. And lastly, every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. I think those are some pretty awesome.
I think that's what all things probably should be, equality for all. I was raised in Catholicism, which is way different than probably Mormonism, but you're taught to really have deep guilt. But I decided as I was growing up and I got involved in different kinds of thinking, and I realized that most things are man-made, man's thoughts, man's writings. And since a lot of us can be inept at times, I rather find out for myself what's true, what's not true. I do not believe in something up in the sky, but I do have a feeling there's something more than us, because I've never seen mankind be so confused continuously, and we don't treat people equal. If we all came from the same place, and we may be a little different here and there, we should be more accepting. Religion is not inclusive. It's non-accepting. And that's why I'm probably not an atheist, because I believe that we all made all these rules to keep us all in line.
Yeah, religion isn't inclusive, it's exclusive, right? It others everybody who doesn't at least say they believe in all the teachings of your particular faith.
I'll get your mic. Marie.
I have a mic. Religion does have something. It's a coming of people together, a social. I know an atheist director of music in a church because he loves music.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we do need the social aspect. And it's hard to be an atheist and be a social, go to church.
Yeah, it is really hard. So something that religion provides that atheism by itself doesn't provide is that sense of community, that sense of social interaction and community that you build naturally through attending services with the same group of people week in and week out, and holding church activities and doing, potluck fundraisers for the Smiths down the road whose house burned down. Those are a lot of the things that religion does serve for its community, and it's what makes it really difficult for people to both leave religions and that when they do leave, to remain apart from their religion because they miss that sense of community. So groups like Atheists of Utah, and I know the Humanists, and there are other secular organizations. There's Oasis here in Utah, there's Sunday Assembly, and we all do try to fulfill some of those social needs and community needs for people who have left a religion, and when you do that, oftentimes you leave behind your community. Particularly with the LDS faith, when you spend more than 3 hours every Sunday in church, and then you've got family home evening, you've got young women's, you've got young men's, you've got social mixers, you've got Boy Scout. I mean, all of these things that are tied to the church, that almost your entire week is filled with religious activities. And they have the resources to do that because they've got all of that money coming in from their parishioners. Secular organizations really struggle there because we don't have that built-in infrastructure of having a church building that we can all go to and attend, right? I come and talk to you guys at the Senior Center. Atheists of Utah doesn't have its own building. Humanists of Utah doesn't have its own building where we can hold, where we can host parties or hold speakers or any kind of thing like that. I think Oasis and the Humanists and a bunch of other groups have actually used religious buildings to hold their gatherings because we just don't have that built-in infrastructure because we don't have the funds coming in from people in order to have such a thing.
Before Mike asks this question, I want to interject on that because one of the most heartbreaking things that I have seen since coming to Utah is the role that religion can play in breaking up families. Since I made a commitment to myself and my wife at the time, our children will not be exposed to religion until they're old enough to evaluate it on their own. We're going to work on teaching them how to think and not what to think. And boy, I'll tell you, when I came out here and I saw what happened to a lot of young people who pulled away from the church or, heaven forbid, came out as gay, I was shocked. And that's why, if those of you that were members, I had the Mama Dragons here about a year ago, and the stories they had to talk about in terms of defending their children. I find it religion. I don't get, this socialization aspect of religion, of being conditioned and linking with all your family and community. That's dangerous stuff. And so, anyway, Mike.
No, I don't think I've got to say anything.
Oh, okay. And by the way, yesterday I was accosted. I was leaving Mount Olympus Senior Center after attending a current events forum, and it was just kind of ironic that this event was occurring today. And some woman approached me in the parking lot. She had a Halloween costume on. She looked like a hooker ghost. And she comes up to me and she starts pointing her finger at me. She says, "I know who you are. You're the devil. You are trying to take Christians away from their church." And she's, doing this kind of thing. I thought she was going to take a swing at me. And I said, "Lady, you outnumber me, so, don't worry about it." But
Well, she's in a Halloween costume celebrating a holiday that a lot of other fundamentalist Christians would say she's evil.
That's right. Lynette, let me get this to Lynette. This is pretty unreliable, Lynette. You have to speak up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Love, I can hear you.
More? Oh, there we go.
There you
One has to be very, very strong within oneself in order not to be sucked in. Unfortunately, the families, I've been ostracized from, that's a long history, but my family came here. They're not Mormons on both sides, but they married Mormons, and that's bad news. So anyway, you have to be strong within yourself. You know who you are, you know your values, and it amazes me that people don't look around at nature right in front of our eyes every single day. What is the variety? It's endless. The animals, it's just endless. Does that not spark something in you that would say, there isn't just one thing? Yes, the life itself, to me, life is the factor. That's the underlying factor. Humanity, we are all humans. But the tremendous variety within that should sort of wake people up, I think, and say, no, there's no one right thing. There's nobody has a corner on goodness or evil. And that in itself, if you really look around, should, in my opinion, in my biased opinion, wake you up a little bit. That's all I have to say. So it's nice to have the different opinions in this group, and we do have to live with the differences because that's basic to nature. Many differences.
Oh, Mike, okay, I'm on my way.
Go.
Speak up and give it a try.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay.
My name is Felix.
Uh-oh.
Hi, Felix.
Hi. I'm an atheist. and,
Awesome.
But I have a doctorate in early Christian history, and that sets people off. And so we have some very interesting conversations.
Just speak up, please.
Pardon me?
The mic's not working, so just speak up, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's off and on, I'm sorry.
So you have a doctorate in Christian studies?
Early Christian history.
Early Christian
because,
history?
You know, when I tell that to people, they say, why would you do that? I say, well, I'm interested in the history of Christianity, not necessarily want to join it, but
Yeah.
I like the history. History is wonderful when you look at early Christians, how they fought, and how they managed to stay together and live.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating stuff. It's
Oh, yeah.
it's all awesome. We've got a professor or former professor of history here also, and I was telling him that how cool it is, or how much I love learning about history. I think it gives us insight and better informs us not only of where we are but where we're going. If we look at where we've been in the past and can see trend lines, and yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think.
So a lot of people just don't like the idea, like, is it that they think you're holding two contradicting views?
They think I'm trying to convert them into something that I believe in.
Thank you for coming.
And
Hey,
I'm not.
thank you very much for coming.
I really don't. If you want to believe certain things, hey, help yourself.
Yeah.
I see we're starting to lose the folks. So before any of you have to leave, any more of you, let's give a big hand to Dan Ellis. And if you have individual comments or questions you'd like to share with Dan, you could stay around for a few more minutes.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Where are we going to go? Looks like the cat. Are you on the right?